Hobgoblins and witches and things that go bump in the night.
Hey everybody, this is Lynn from Evil Dread. Today I'm going to be doing a solo ep because I went out of town for fall break, and so Wyeth and I are unfortunately separated. So yeah, I am in a car. I am in Santa Rosa, New Mexico right now on the 9-hour journey. So if there is kind of a dull roar in the background, that is definitely Interstate 40, crossing the beautiful, desolate Southwest. Okay, so the plan was to do an ep with my friend Abby. We did not get around to that. We had a pretty busy weekend. So I'm just going to kind of recap all of the horror that we watched in the past 3 days that I've been there. And we have watched a shit ton. It has been a very busy, lazy weekend of watching movies and drinking cider and carving pumpkins for fall break. So, first of all, one of the movies we watched was Once Bitten, which I've been trying to get Wyeth to watch for a solid year now. It is a 1985 Jim Carrey vampire comedy, and he plays a virgin in high school named Mark who tries to get lucky. He goes out one night and he runs into Lauren Hutton, supermodel of the 70s, and she is a vampire and she's looking for virgin blood. So she starts a thing with him. It's a wacky teen sex comedy featuring vampires, and one of his best friends, this is the best part of the movie, one of his best friends wears a sweatshirt that he has clearly made himself. It is a plain sweatshirt with very medium-sized writing, slightly higher than it should be, so it's clear he just, ironed this shit on, and it says, freelance gynecologist, and I would absolutely kill for that sweatshirt. It is not remarked upon. He wears it at school in the cafeteria. It is hilarious. So, freelance gynecologist sweatshirts, if we ever get a merch store up, that is definitely going to be in there. Alright, so Once Bitten, it's a very silly movie. It's a 80s teen sex comedy with a little bit of horror thrown in. It's very over the top, very silly. Jim Carrey slowly transforms into a vampire, and at the end he actually has to have sex with his girlfriend, so he's no longer a virgin, so Lauren Hutton doesn't want him anymore. It's very goofy, but I love it. We also watched an Australian film from a few years ago called Boys in the Trees, and it's on Netflix. Me and Abby, we're the worst. We always try to watch things that we've never seen before and then always end up just watching Gilmore Girls or Buffy or something. But this time we actually did it. We actually watched a new movie. So it's called Boys in the Trees. It was really interesting. It reminded me a lot of the Halloween Tree. There's this kid, his name's Corey. Oh, it's set in 1997 also. So his name's Corey. He hangs out with this group of real asshole punks, and they're in high school. It's kind of the end of high school. And they all bully this kid Jonah, and they take pictures of him and put it all around town and egg his house and throw a dead bird at his window. We're all like, I don't know why they are being so mean to Jonah. But, and everyone calls him, the F slur, really, really homophobic comments and stuff like that. So on Halloween night, Jonah runs into... Did I say his name is Corey? Let's call him Corey. Jonah runs into Corey at a skate park, and he's like, you have to walk me home because you treated me like shit, stuff like that. So Corey begrudgingly agrees, so him and Jonah hang out all night. And there's actually, it's kind of a bridge to Terabithia kind of thing. So apparently they were best friends growing up, like when they were little. And they used to play this game called Cicadas, and they would go kind of into the woods beside the town. And once they stepped over this bridge, they would be in Cicadas, which is this like magical land where there are zombies and ghosts and all this stuff. And they would play there for hours when they were kids. So Jonah's like, let's play it one more time. Let's do it. So they jump over the bridge and they're in Cicadas. And so that's when the movie starts getting like a really magical realist kind of tone going, and they tell all these stories about these people in town, like this little girl who went to a tunnel and died, and all of the villains in the stories are teen boys who are just really unmerciful and cruel and just terrible people who do terrible things. So it's kind of a commentary on, I guess, growing up as a boy, as a young man, hardening yourself and becoming cruel and misogynistic and homophobic and shutting out all your emotions in service of growing up, I guess. So they go on all these adventures. There's an Aboriginal man who is dressed in all white who is kind of following them. And it's a one crazy night kind of movie, so it all happens on Halloween night. So Jonah keeps disappearing and reappearing. There's some kind of spooky stuff going on, and like immediately, Abby and I knew that Jonah was dead. Like, it is obvious, and I mean, that's kind of the twist, but also you absolutely should have known, because there's at one point they go into a graveyard and a kind of Dia de los Muertos thing is happening, which I did not know that. I'm sure there are people of Mexican descent in Australia, but I don't know, just kind of out of place it seemed. And on the altars they have all the pictures of the people who have died, and there's a picture of Jonah, and the man in the white suit reaches out his hand to Jonah and asks him to like take it, and Corey has to be like, no, we have to run away, so they buy themselves more time. But at the beginning, Jonah was like, come on, I want to show you something. So at the end, he's like, it's finally time, and he shows him his body. So throughout the film, Jonah's like, you left me, why did you leave me? You said that you would be friends with me forever, you said that we would always protect each other. And so the viewer thinks that Corey just kind of abandoned him when he started being bullied, and oh my god, I have to sneeze. Sorry. So the viewer thinks that Corey was just kind of being a dick and just like left him behind, all this stuff. But there are these few flashes of them being kids, which is like, you know, something a little off is happening. And then finally, towards the end of the film, they reveal that at one point when they were children, they got stuck in the tunnel that they had gone through. And these teen boys, that they characterize them as wolves all the time, like they're just wolves. And Corey is wearing a wolfman mask, so it's like being unfeeling and cruel and hyper-masculine young men are being characterized as wolves in this movie. So 3 teen boys, when Jonah and Corey were like 10, trap them in the tunnel, and there's like a shot of one of the boys unbuttoning his pants, and so it's clearly alluding to the fact that Jonah was about to be assaulted and Corey ran away to save himself. So that's the kind of unspoken terrible event between them that kind of broke them up. And that also gives context to everyone calling Jonah a fag and being terrible to him and calling him a gay boy and stuff like that. So it's really, really heartbreaking. But by the end of the night, Corey is like, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry I left you. It's haunted me forever. I can't believe I did that. I apologize so much. I'm so sorry. And Jonah's like, I think tonight may have made up for it. And then he reveals the body. It's a really odd movie because it's hard to describe the tone of it. There's a lot of different themes going on, but it's definitely about growing up as a young boy and trying to keep that kindness and like loving spirit that you had as a child before it was kind of beaten out of you when you're a teenage boy. And it's also about forgiveness and death, and yeah, there's a lot going on, but it's a really lovely movie. It definitely went directions I was not expecting. Like I said, it reminds me a lot of the Halloween Tree, which really messed me up as a child because they're kind of following the spirit of one of their friends who has died and going through all of these different death rituals from across history in the world. So yeah, Boys in the Trees, pretty good, solid pick. It's much more emotional than your average horror movie. It's not scary per se, it's spooky and it's really well shot, but yeah, it's not gory in any sense. It's a very humane film, I guess. That's probably the best way to say it. So we also watched Scream. Abby had not seen Scream, so I brought it and I made sure we watched it. And I have a lot of feelings about Scream. You guys can probably tell that. I probably talked about it before on the pod. So, Scream, if you don't know, is a Wes Craven joint, a flick by the master of horror, Wes Craven. It came out in 1996, stars Neve Campbell and Rose McGowan, who is recently resurfaced as a real feminist hero, sticking up against abusers in the industry and stuff, so it was really cool to see her in another context, being a badass. Skeet Ulrich, who has the worst name ever for anyone who's ever existed. Written by Kevin Williamson, who went on to create Dawson's Creek and Vampire Diaries, which I am an unabashed fan of. Teen Damon forever, all the way. So anyway, Scream, if you don't know, I assume a lot of people who are familiar with horror movies are familiar with Scream because it is considered a classic. So Scream is kind of a classic slasher, but in the context of a world where these kids know exactly what movies have been in the horror cultural lexicon. So these kids are referencing Prom Night, they're referencing Halloween, they know horror movies. So there's a real meta quality to it. They are interacting with genre tropes in a way that hadn't really been done. So it centers on Sydney Prescott, who is a high school student in Woodsboro. And she has a boyfriend named Billy, played by Skeet Ulrich. And they have some sexual issues, like he wants to get it on and she's not ready, stuff like that, usual BS. But it's actually much deeper in this film than in others, like Once Bitten, perhaps. So the film starts with Drew Barrymore, who plays Casey Becker, and she is home alone, making popcorn, gonna put on a video. She gets a phone call, and the person says, "Who is this?" She says, "Well, who are you trying to reach?" And she's like, "Oh, it was just a wrong number, no worries, later." The person calls back and says, "Hey, it's me again." She's like, "Well, why did you call back?" And he's like, "I'm sorry, I had a wrong number. I just wanted to apologize." And she's like, "No worries." And he's like, "What's your name? What are you doing tonight?" And tries to start talking to her. And she's kind of flirty. She's like, "Oh, I'm just about to watch a video, blah, 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 you know." And he's like, what video? And she said, Halloween. And they talk about scary movies. And he's like, "What's your favorite scary movie?" Which is a huge iconic line from the film. What's your favorite scary movie? So it gets a little weirder, and he's like, "What's your name?" And she's like, "Why? Why do you want to know?" And he says, "Because I want to know who I'm looking at." And so she stops and says, "What did you say?" And he said, "I want to know who I'm talking to." And she said, "That's not what you said." So it's clear that, like, the call is coming from inside the house, like in When a Stranger Calls. But so Casey's on the phone with this person, and he's tormenting her, and he's like, "If you hang up on me, I'll gut you like a fish." And she looks out on the porch and her boyfriend's there tied and beat up to a chair, and beat up. And then he's killed. So the killer plays a game with her, and it's horror movie trivia. So he's like, oh, you said Halloween was your favorite movie. Who's the killer in Halloween? And if you get this wrong, I'll kill your boyfriend. She says Michael Myers. And blah, blah. It goes on and on. She gets one wrong. He kills the boyfriend and tormenting her, running around the house. It's a person in a ghost mask and a like long black robe, cloak thing. And she ends up killed, and then the movie begins. So it does that thing where it really fakes you out, where like, oh, this is, you know, the person we're gonna root for. This is the final girl. She's great. I like her. And then it immediately kills her within the first 10 minutes of the movie, which is a really classic, notorious, cool opening shot in horror history. So anyway, Sydney cuts to Sydney. Billy comes in through her window. They kind of make out a little bit. Anyway, so they go to school the next day. Casey Becker's dead. This person starts tormenting Sydney. It's revealed that Sydney's mother was killed a year ago to the day almost. And she was raped and murdered, and someone went to jail for it. But Sydney's starting to doubt that she helped send she sent the right guy to prison. She's like, maybe this person who's calling me and tormenting me did it, because the guy is like, you're gonna die just like your mother. Do you want to die? Your mother sure didn't. Stuff like that. So it all culminates in this big party thrown by Matthew Lillard's character Stu. Matthew Lillard is a revelation in this film. I don't give a damn what anybody says. He is amazing and perfect. His character, there's so much like tongue action. He's like sticking out his tongue and being crazy and like over delivering stuff. Like I assume that none of that was in the script, and Wes Craven was like, what the hell is this kid doing? All right, whatever. Go ahead. Turn it up. Yeah, sure. Go on. And just kept it all in, because Matthew Lillard is crazy in this film. Anyway, so they have a big party at his house. It's the last like 45 minutes of the movie. It's really amazing. One by one, people are dying. Sydney is trying to get away. Randy, who's played by Jamie Kennedy, he works at a video store. He's one of their friends. He's also the reason why I wanted to work at a video store, and I got to, and it was not as good as I thought it would be based on watching Scream. Randy is kind of the horror nerd, and at the party he outlines the rules. He's like, you don't know the rules? There are certain rules to surviving a horror movie. You can't have sex, because sex equals death. It's sin. You can't do drugs. You can't drink, because it's the sin factor. You can't say, I'll be right back. So they're really in conversation with horror tropes and cliches in a way that's both loving and kind of, I guess it expands on them, for sure. So Sydney has sex with Billy, and then he is killed by Ghostface almost immediately after. Sydney's running around. At the end, she sees Stu and Randy outside, and they do the classic, it's him, no, it's him, oh my god, and she says, fuck you both, and closes the door on them. She's safe in the room, well, in the house. Billy, surprise, not dead, comes down stairs, and he's supposedly all bleeding and everything. He opens the door, Randy comes in, and he's like, no, you don't let Stu in, he's gone mad. And Billy says, we all go a little mad sometimes, and then shoots Randy. He's like, Norman Bates, psycho, you know. So it was Billy and Stu the whole time. They're the two guys, they're the two killers, and they're obsessed with movies, so they're constantly quoting movies and horror movies, and, oh, this is corn syrup, the same stuff they used for Pig's Blood and Carrie, all this. It's really clever. Sydney obviously defeats them, but yeah, the journey to to get to that is so fun and so scary and spooky and cool. I love Scream so much. It's probably my favorite horror movie because it's so dense with, I guess, commentary on horror and film in general. There's a lot of times where Sydney is like, you know, I hate horror movies. There's always some big-breasted girl who's always running up the stairs when she should be going out the front door. It's insulting. So she is positioning herself as a different final girl, which she is, because like Randy says, in the final girl narrative, traditionally, you have to be a virgin to survive. That happened to Nancy in Nightmare on Elm Street, Laurie in Halloween. It's like, to be worthy to live, you have to be pure and conform to this kind of Protestant ideas of sexual purity and femininity. You can't be too over the top. You have to be sweet and kind and dress modestly, all this stuff. So Sydney was kind of the first final girl to actually have sex, and she had sex with the killer, which is another layer of it. And it doesn't diminish her worth as a character or a person or someone worthy of survival at all. If anything, it empowers her. So I love this movie because it doesn't condemn young girl sexuality. It does not say that, because you are like have a sexual life and you're active in that way, you're no less than, you know, your counterparts in other final girls. You still deserve to live. You're still smart. You're still valuable and valued. So yeah, that's an amazing part. There's also the fact that, and this happens in a lot of horror movies, she has to adopt the violence enacted upon her to have a kind of catharsis, and she has to reclaim her life and her survival by speaking the men's language of violence. So she at one point dresses up in the Ghostface outfit and attacks Billy. So it's a real role reversal. She starts using the voice changer. So she's like, "What's your favorite scary movie?" And, you know, taunting them and everything. So it's really interesting how she maintains her integrity and her autonomy while co-opting violence as a means of survival rather than a means of like satisfaction and sadistic joy. She does it to survive, and she has no qualms about that. In later Scream movies, it really goes into her trauma, which I love. Oh my gosh, it's so rare that like final girls get an interior life after the events of the film in the subsequent sequels. But you can tell that Sydney is traumatized by this. It's horrific for her. And at one point, in the third film, which I'm not too big of a fan of, we see that Sydney has become a phone operator for a women's crisis hotline. So she is helping women who went through the same thing she did, maybe not such a theatrical extent, but she's clearly positioned as a trauma survivor, which is amazing. And she's constantly reclaiming her ability to survive and her recovery, and it's amazing. Sydney is the perfect final girl. I'm definitely going to write my thesis on Scream. Yeah, I've decided that this weekend. So yeah, Scream is a lovely, it's fun, it's thought-provoking, it's scary, it's clever, and yeah, all-time favorite, all-time. What else did we watch? We watched a few episodes of Buffy, which was good. I think for our Thanksgiving episode, we're going to do one episode of Buffy. But a little bit of background, I watched all of Buffy in high school, like over the course of about a year. There are 7 seasons. It started in 1996, ended in whatever 7 years after that is. don't expect too much of me in the math department. 2003. Yeah, 2003. Okay. So it's created by Joss Whedon, which we've talked about before. He has recently been kind of defamed for being a really shitty person, but he created Buffy and Firefly and Angel, Dollhouse, a bunch of other stuff. Cabin in the Woods, another one of our favorites around here. So Buffy is such a landmark for me personally, and I know for a bunch of other people. It's the kind of classic high school dramedy, but with vampires and demons, and Buffy is a young girl who has this calling. Like, every generation a Slayer is born, and it's her, and her destiny is to fight vampires and the forces of darkness, and she's super strong and a badass, and she can fight amazingly, but she's also 16 and doesn't really know what she's doing, and she's trying to balance school and being a Slayer and being in love with Angel, all this stuff. So we watched a few episodes with Spike, who is my favorite. We watched School Hard, which I think is the 3rd episode of season 2. It introduces Spike. Spike is actually a vampire who comes to town, and he looks like Billy Idol, and he wears like long black leather duster, like Very Always Sunny. He has bleached hair and a scar in one of his eyebrows, and he smokes cigarettes, and he's a badass, and he's British. Abby said his British accent is terrible, and she would know because her dad is British, but I don't care. He comes to town with his girlfriend Drusilla, and she is crazy. She is also British, and she's like she dresses in like white nightgowns, and she's very ethereal and weird and kind of psychic, and she says stuff that doesn't make sense. They have one of the best lines ever. Drusilla asks Spike, "Do you love me, even the parts you can't see?" And he says, "Eyeballs to entrails, my sweet." So it's really goofy and fun and goth, and yeah. So Spike comes to town and crashes the parent-teacher conference, which is great, and it really is a fantastic introduction to a character. Later on, we find out that his first name was William the Bloody, and he got the nickname Spike because he impaled his enemies with railroad spikes, so edgy TM or whatever. But then at one point they do a flashback episode, and he's actually called William the Bloody because his poetry was so bloody awful, and he was this kind of really effeminate and lovesick little poet in Victorian England. And then he's kind of transforms into Spike over the years, and he's hardened into the person we see then. We also watched Lover's Walk, which is season 3. And that is when Spike comes back to town because Drew dumped him. We watched Halloween, which is a great episode, season 2. That's the classic Halloween trope. It was ripped off by Halloween Town, but it's the trope of going to an enchanted costumes shop, and then whatever costume you're wearing, you turn into that creature or person. So Willow becomes a ghost, Buffy becomes an 18th century girl because she was trying to impress Angel, and she's so helpless and stupid. And it's like, maybe being Buffy is better than being, well, that is a little bit misogynistic, but it's better than being this kind of helpless, super effeminate woman from days gone by, right? Angel doesn't turn into anything because he's a vampire and he doesn't do anything. Xander turns into like a soldier, so he has like tactical knowledge and all this stuff. Then finally we watched The Wish, which is such a great episode. There's a vengeance demon who comes to town. Her name is Anya, and she grants wishes, like really like vengeful wishes. And so Cordelia wishes that Buffy had never come to Sunnydale. And so Anya grants that wish, and then we get to see this kind of alternate world where, what if Buffy had never showed up? What if vampires overran the town? there's a curfew. Everyone wears black because they don't want to be noticed by the vampires. They have to be in by a certain time at night. They can't go to the Bronze, which is the club they all go to, because that's now a vampire hangout. At one point, Cordelia asks, well, is Xander and Willow at least, gotten what they deserve, because they kind of screwed her over? She's like, are they super unpopular and everyone hates them? And Harmony, one of Cordelia's friends, was like, they're both dead. And then it's revealed that Willow and Xander are vampires, and they're so sadistic and evil, and they torture Angel. And Buffy shows up, and she's so hard and sad and cynical and mean, and it shows that without that happening, all of their lives would be so much worse off. Like, without friendship and the strength that they get from each other, it would be a nightmare scenario. So they come back, they break the spell, and it gives us a different perspective on the world of Buffy and how it could be if things had gone slightly differently. It's a great episode written by Jane Espenson, one of the best writers ever. She's also a writer for Gilmore Girls, which we also watch. Also, we watched my favorite episode of Buffy. We watched a lot of Buffy. This is probably just me rambling for 40 minutes with really loud car noises in the background. I'm sorry about that. So this is the bonus episode, I guess. We watched my favorite episode of Buffy, which is also in season 2. I think season 2 is a masterpiece, honestly. One of the best examples of television story writing in history. It's called Lie to Me, and Buffy's friend from LA comes into town. His name's Ford, and he moved there. He's going to finish out his year at Sunnydale. Turns out that was a lie. Turns out Ford actually has kind of he runs a vampire club for people who pretend to be vampires, and it's so late 90s, Queen of the Damned. Everyone's in fake leather and long hair and look terrible, but it's really funny. Korn is basically playing in the background. So all of these people want to be vampires. So he makes a deal with Spike to say, okay, I'll get you Buffy if you make me a vampire. And Spike is like, yeah, okay, whatever. Just get me the girl. So he lures Buffy in. They're all stuck in this club. And she's like, why are you doing this? I am going to kill you if you make all of these people die, because they are not going to turn them. They are just going to kill them, and they'll kill you too. And he's like, oh, this is perfect. This is exactly what should happen, because I'm dying. This was what I planned, and now is when I get to reveal that I'm dying, because I have a nest of tumors in my brain, and I have been throwing up for 24 hours straight, and I don't want to die. I don't deserve to die. I'm going to be a vampire because I deserve to live, and I don't deserve to die this horrible, painful death from this, brain cancer that I have. And oh my god, Buffy's such a badass. She comes back and she's like, is this one I'm supposed to feel sorry for you? Because I do, but I will kill you if you put all of these people in jeopardy. You can't just do these terrible things if you have a good reason. Like on Brooklyn Nine-Nine, cool story, cool motive, still murder. But it's so sad, because she is very horrified for him, but she's also like, there is nothing that can justify you doing this to all these other people. And I'm sorry that this has happened, but I can't let you do this. So Spike comes in, they defeat him. Ford is stuck in the club with Spike and Drew. They go back and get his body. He's been killed, obviously, because it's Spike. Buffy and Giles, her watcher, are at his grave at the very end of the episode. And she's like, why are things so complicated? I don't know who I can love or hate or trust, because things are just so much more gray than I thought they would be. And Giles is like, I don't know what to tell you. This isn't it's not cut and dry. Things are complicated. And then Ford pops out of his grave as a vampire. So Spike turned him. Spike did a good thing that he didn't have to do. So that recontextualizes who Spike is to us. And so Buffy immediately stakes him, and Giles is like, what do you want me to tell you? And she says, lie to me. And he says, well, you can always tell who the good guys are because they're white hats, and you can always tell who the bad guys are because they have horns and fangs, and everything is fine. No one ever dies. Everything is good and beautiful, and justice prevails in the end. And she ends the episode by saying liar and calling him a liar. And it's the perfect Buffy episode to me because it's so funny and the writing's so clever. There's some really just hilarious lines in it. But also the plot is so indicative of what Buffy does so well, which is making us rethink morality in a way that's not tired. You know, I think anti-heroes and gray morality have become so overdone in the past 10 years. I'm thinking with like Game of Thrones and Walking Dead. Like, if nothing matters, if everything's meaningless, I don't know why I care about these characters. But Buffy does it in a way where it gives the characters more depth. So like, we see Spike and we know he's a bad guy, but he showed mercy to this kid who's dying, right? And Ford comes in and Buffy says, I just wish I could hate him. So it complicates things, and it makes a much more realistic and compelling conflict to make it so gray and interesting. Buffy also does some wonderful, it's kind of known for doing this wonderful thing of having someone start out as a villain and then become a good guy, like the wacky neighbor kind of, like who's just hanging out and redeems himself, and then it takes people that we know and love, like Angel and Willow down the line, and it turns them into the ultimate villains, and then they have to redeem themselves or they have to be defeated. So it goes places you really don't expect. It's a lovely show. There are definitely some ups and downs. Like season 6 was basically torture for the viewers. They really did some terrible things. It was so unpleasant. But season 2 in particular is perfect. I love it. The big twist in the middle. Also, like, this is a bunch of spoilers for Buffy if you don't watch Buffy. Buffy is with Angel, who's a vampire with a soul. He was cursed to have a soul by, they call them gypsies, but Romani people back in, hundreds of years ago or whatever. So he's cursed to have a soul. So he's a good vampire. He recognizes right from wrong. He, can feel things and feel love. So on her 16th birthday, Buffy has sex with him, and she loses her virginity to him. And supposedly the curse can only be broken if he experiences a moment of true happiness. So Angel loses his soul, like, immediately, which is so, like, if you really think about it, he just, like, ejaculated out his soul, and that's really funny. But so he loses his soul, goes bad. Oh my god. He kills their friends, he tortures Giles, he does all this terrible stuff, and Spike at first is like cool with it, and then he realizes Angel's really kind of moving in on his territory. He's getting cozy up with Drew. Angel wants to send the world to hell, and Spike is like, I don't know, I kind of like this place. People walking around like Happy Meals with legs. I don't know why we would get rid of our food supply, stuff like that. So Spike teams up with Buffy to defeat Angel. And at the end, in the finale, the climax, Buffy's fighting Angel. Willow is doing a spell to get him his soul back, and it works 2 seconds before Buffy stabs him in the heart and sends him to hell. So it is heartbreaking. It's horrific and so sad, but it's such a compelling narrative. And that's another thing. Buffy and her losing her virginity is such a interesting permutation of the final girl narrative, because Buffy doesn't go bad. She doesn't lose herself or like get killed or punished because she has sex, but the man she has sex with turns on her and becomes a nightmare and a demon. And I think Joss Whedon once said that, like, Angel isn't the good guy, Angel's the guy you have sex with and then he starts treating you like shit. So I mean, there's that, but there's also a moment in the car with Giles after all that happens, and she explains that it was her that caused him to lose his soul because they had sex, and Giles is like, do you want me to yell at you? Do you want me to make you feel guilty? Because you're not gonna get it. All you get is my respect and my support. And it's like, oh my god. It's really emotional and just a wonderful show, and if you haven't seen it, highly recommend. Great. Oh yeah, we watch a lot of Gilmore Girls. I talk about Gilmore Girls sometimes. It's not horror by a long shot. It's not even spooky, but it is kind of the perfect autumn show because it's all set in this New England small town, and there are all these little shops, and everyone, I don't know, it's just a perfect autumnal, like, Connecticut feeling I get with that show. I always watch it in the fall, and it makes me feel all cozy and nice, and there are leaves falling, and it's a really lovely show about women's relationships over 3 generations with a grandmother, a mother, and then her daughter. So yeah, probably not for this crowd, but but high praise on that. Okay, so I am probably going to wrap this up. I don't know what else to say. Basically, all of these were my personal picks this week, so no personal picks this week because I just told you a bunch of them. So yeah, I will sign off now. Have a good week, and thanks for listening. Bye-bye.
Keely behaved like a man demented, obsessed, utterly lost.